Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. I'm really excited about today's podcast because I'm interviewing an amazing woman, Dr. Naidoo, and she's quite unique in that she is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, but she's also a professional chef, and she specializes in nutrition. So imagine going to a brain doctor and finding out that she knew all about nutrition and she also loved to cook and she was a great chef. Like, what an amazing find. I think everybody would love to find a psychiatrist like that. And she has, I think I got to ask her this term, nutritional psychiatry, sounds like a new term to me. So Dr. Uma, thank you very much for joining me and doing this podcast, because I want to introduce people to your new book. I want them to know about it. It's a great book, and wanted to talk to you more about nutritional psychiatry. What does that look like? What does that help us? What do we learn about ourselves because of this new field of nutritional psychiatry? So welcome.
Thank you so much, Donna. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for having me. Thank you for that kind introduction. Nutritional psychiatry, the term, is more recent, but many clinicians have been practicing how to counsel their patients about, lifestyle measures and how to live through having side effects when they're using a medication. For myself, what I can speak to is the fact that I just felt a sense of responsibility when I was a young resident, sort of learning how to prescribe medications, because I also knew that they came with side effects. And for that reason, I began early on to really explore nutrition and understand what I could be saying to them. There's such, people tend to be more aware of how to eat to lower their blood pressure or lower their cholesterol, but they tend not to know much about mental health. And for me, that was really very important.
Great. And the book is called This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, which I think people are really experiencing a lot of right now, and much more than that. So this is a really fun book. Like I kind of credit myself for knowing a lot about food and gut brain stuff and all, but I was thrilled how you always bring in the gut brain connection. And is it available on Amazon?
Great,
Really
it is. It
useful
is available at
information
all
on
major
so many
online
different
retailers,
topics.
and
So
they can also
great
go to my
chapters. So let's
book site, and the links
get
are all
into all
there.
that. So you've been studying this gut brain connection for a really long time now. What is the connection? Just for those people that might be listening, I don't know, they've been in a closet or something, but it seems like everybody should know about the gut and the brain connection. But can you just talk about that for a little while for the people who don't?
Sure. I think that many people have heard about terms like inflammation, leaky gut, problems, with an autoimmune disease or other things like that. But many people do not really associate the gut-brain connection with mental health. And, certainly from my clinical work and my review of the sort of ongoing research, there's this, biochemical, anatomical, physiological connection between the gut and the brain. And anatomically, this starts really from before we are born and how our organs form in our body. And there is a nerve that we all have called the vagus nerve that connects the gut to the brain. And I like to tell people that I call this the sort of informational superhighway in the gut brain connection, because it's bidirectional and it actively communicates between what's going on in the gut to the brain and vice versa. Where this becomes important is that managing our gut bacteria in terms of keeping the good balance of gut bacteria in our favor. So feeding the good bugs in our gut the right diet, taking care of them in a certain way by not being stressed, for example, not eating, foods that are inflammatory. All of those things impact the gut bacteria. And when we feed them with, healthy whole foods, fresh, vegetables, fruit, probiotics, prebiotics, and the right things that they need. And we avoid the processed foods, the highly sugared foods, the trans fats and fast foods, those types of things, which drive the gut bacteria in the wrong direction. We can actually change the gut bacteria and start to change things within a day. And the reason I say that is if you're eating the foods that are good for you, you can start to make positive changes in a day. But the opposite is true as well. You can start, this slow and steady inflammation by starting and continuing to eat the wrong foods as well.
I think the book is really timely that you're releasing it right now. You probably spent years working on it, right?
I did spend some time working on it.
I know what that's like,
It's always a
but
process.
yeah, definitely. But it's, this is being recorded in the time of COVID, and we're having a lot of anxiety and depression. People don't know what their future is going to be like, or any of us, like what's going to happen. So, and also I just want to point this out that I get so frustrated with the media because they're always telling us, to like, from prevent from getting infected, to wash our hands, wear face masks, stay 6 feet away from the next person. No one ever talks about the immune system, which is really what we need to be doing, is building that immune system.
Yes.
That's what's going to protect us from this virus and every other one that's going to come down the pike for the rest of our life.
Absolutely.
So I'm really glad you've got so much great information. You always bring in the gut and the bacteria in the gut, which I loved. I was surprised, actually. I thought it was going to be about just food and brain, but I didn't know you were going to do the bring in the whole gut-brain connection, which is really good, and how the foods are affecting the different bacteria. So I'd like to kind of get into some of that. I know you've been studying the gut-brain connection for a long time, and how did you kind of stumble upon or get directed into this connection between mental health and the food?
Absolutely. I feel that I was incorporating dietary changes to my patients as I was prescribing medications. And even though I still prescribe, I do feel that as I've completed and continue to understand mental health and the conditions, that there are more than one ways that my patients can feel better. And food is something that we all have to do anyways. So why not do it, in an improved way? I think we all make errors. May not have a perfect diet on a given day, but we can always try to make these changes. And much of this really came from my reading of the literature, noticing clinical symptoms and signs in patients, things that, here's a great example. Someone was referred to me by a gastroenterologist for severe new onset anxiety and panic in a person who was middle-aged. And you wouldn't necessarily expect the disorder to just present for the first time at that point in life. As I took a proper history, this was a young executive who was recently promoted at work and was doing very well in terms of her career. But when you really trace back the history over about an 18-month to 2-year period, she had stopped eating meals at home, was traveling 3 to 4 days of the week, spending time in airports eating either fast foods, junk food, or food on the go, and almost never having a meal at home, sleeping poorly. So her body was although she was, doing well in terms of her career, her body and mind were very stressed. Her diet had changed completely in that 18-month period, and she actually ended up having significant inflammation. So
Inflammation in her gut, or
inflammation in her gut.
mm-hmm.
What then happened is this sort of chronic slow burning inflammation brought on by the stress and all of these different mechanisms then presented actually as panic. But when you actually sat down and obtained the history from her by making slow and steady, careful changes to how she was eating, she was then able to really start to slowly see some positive change. And she was having a few panic attacks, but she was willing, actually. She was willing and wanted to try a different way to feel better. She wanted to use nutritional strategies and felt that she was willing to tolerate that anxiety she was having to work on this in a different way. And while it took us some time, because it does take some time for the gut to heal, we were able to help her feel better better over time, and work on, even in a mind body holistic and integrated approach, look, build in ways to help her stress as well as foods that she incorporated to fend off this anxiety.
Well, you said a couple of things I wanted to sort of stress a little bit to the listeners, is that basically this person was very much affected by the stress in her life, and stress does kill the healthy microbes in the gut and allow the other ones to flare up and damage the gut lining. So I think, again, this is a pretty bad time for stress in people's lives. But, I thought, you said over time she was able to, get better. But it doesn't take very long, like you mentioned already, that to change the gut bacteria, it shifts very quickly when you do start eating right. It does, I think, time to make these lifestyle changes. If you're the only food you have available is in an airport, and our other option is not to eat at all or bring something with you.
Or bring something with you.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
this is in some ways the hardest part of making changes is changes to your lifestyle. Figuring out what you can do to balance out
Absolutely.
being on the go all the time.
Absolutely. Or to figure out a way with some of my patients, they almost everyone now, because as you know, Donna, the microbiome is somewhat unique to each person. They might respond differently to different things. And, some of it is really finding out for that person, what are the steps that they can make, and what are the planning steps they can make. For this individual, it really was planning out meals and snacks that she could carry with her on the go, so that she wouldn't end up eating the candy from the bar fridge, or eating, just fast foods at the airports. So it really involved her maybe taking a few extra steps, but then starting to change how she was eating.
Yeah. So all throughout the book, you've got really fun examples. I mean, not that they're fun so much, but I love reading stories about real people. One of them, another example of stress, was one of your patients was a transgender, and she was I guess if I understood it right, she was transitioning into a he, but had just years of trauma,
Hmm.
emotional struggle around that.
Hmm.
Do you remember, can you tell his story a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think that I think what we basically worked on together was how to help him with not just the psychological aspects of the transition, but what you know what that was doing was creating a certain level of stress in the body, and leading to inflammation and discomfort. And so there was almost a way in which we processed it as being, the outer experience, the outer changes that were happening, but also the internal struggles that were going on. And the internal struggles were equally important, but the internal struggles also involved nutritional changes. And that's how we kind of designed what I wrote about in the book about him. So it's in psychiatry, it's people often say to me, do you ask people to eat certain foods or avoid others? And I have to say to them that when someone comes into my office, despite what I eat or what I feel, I've got to be open to helping them where they're at. So if they come in saying I'm a carnivore or I'm vegan, whatever it might be, I've still got to find a way to really help them make some healthy changes, and that sort of tends to be my approach.
This is a chicken and egg question. Do you think that the problems like OCD or anxiety or depression, they come first, or the diet actually causes them to, like, is this person just kind of born naturally, genetically full of anxiety? Because I know that there's a lot of genes that do put somebody at risk. And then let's say they grow up in an environment where there's a lot of tension and stress and
Mhm.
not a lot of love and everything. And but then, would diet have, had they also had a great diet, would that have kept them from becoming depressed or have all this
I
anxiety?
guess
Or
I guess I wish we could study something like that to truly know if from what I do know is from a young age, if you are careful about what a child eats, their brain development is different. You know, their cognition
Hmm.
could be different. Not having the tons of high fructose corn syrup and added sugars in cereals and candy and that kind of stuff does make a difference, not
Hmm.
only to the brain development, but potentially cognitively later on. There's some seminal research being done on that, looking at MRI scans and things. So it's a hard question to know, the chicken and the egg. I do
Hmm.
think, because I do think there are environmental, epigenetic, and many other factors, psychosocial, all of these things that may impact someone's presentation at a given point. But it also does beg the question, what if we were not experiencing the SAD diet, the standard American diet? What if in general people had or were for many decades in this country eating, a healthier diet? Where would we be at compared to where we are now? So I think more research needs to be done for us to figure out those things, while understanding that nutritional science and nutrition research is hard to capture some of this data.
That's a good point. Well, would you just talk to or list some of the different conditions that you cover in the book? I've mentioned anxiety and depression, but what else are you talking about
Sure.
in each of the chapters?
Yeah, so we talk about sleep, both how to, we in each chapter what we do is I describe the foods that I want people to embrace that might help a condition, and the foods to avoid. And we break it down into chapters on sleep and so insomnia and fatigue and brain fog. Then we look at, OCD, we look at trauma, PTSD. We look at a chapter on major mental illness like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So, there are 10 chapters looking at the different conditions, and then there's a chapter on recipes at the end to sort of match the different conditions in that we've covered, and to pair it with the food that we've talked about in those chapters. And these are simple recipes that, because we want to encourage people to try out some healthy options when they can. And that's
Hmm.
pretty much how we divided up the book. And there are definitely some surprising foods that come out of it. For example, people don't realize that processed meats have many things in them that may not be healthy, but they also have things like nitrates, which have been shown which are the additives found in things like bacon, salami, and sausages and other cured meats. That not every brand may have them, but most do, and they actually drive depression. Or that, sweeteners, certain sweeteners have been shown to drive anxiety, as well as foods that have gluten. So those are things that one may not know if they once sort of provided the information, or that, MSG, other glutamates, and other products of glutamate found in certain foods actually can worsen symptoms of PTSD. So I think it's helpful for people to know, number one, how many foods they can eat and embrace to have a better impact on a certain condition, but also the things they should avoid.
Well, let's take one of those conditions. I loved it that you had a chapter on insomnia, because
Mhm.
insomnia and fatigue, actually, because I think so many people are struggling with insomnia. Either they can't fall asleep, or
Mhm.
they get to sleep and then they wake up a couple of
Right.
times during the night. And you mentioned the term chrononutrition.
Yeah, exactly. So, part of it is really the timing of the food, and as well as the types of food. And what we found is that, one of the uh, foods that we touch on in many, and we describe this when we outline the introduction, that there might be foods that you see more than once and in more than one chapter. And that's because the mechanisms in the brain are not going to be different, and the mechanisms therefore to heal and help these conditions may actually be overlapping. But one of the things about insomnia and fatigue is that things like omega-3 fatty acids found in fatty fish are actually are actually found to help sleep. Melatonin. There are actual foods that you can embrace that will help you sleep. So things like pomegranates, walnuts, sunflower seeds, flax seeds, eggs, certain types of fish also have melatonin. So I will often say to people, if you're having a struggle sleeping, and if you do eat eggs, maybe something like an evening omelet with certain ingredients might prepare you for sleep better than something else you might have, especially if you're struggling. And then it turns out, that there are things like chickpeas, which are high in tryptophan, and where tryptophan can help people sleep. So there are little tips like that we try to provide people, and then at the end we provide ideas for how to incorporate those into food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the recipes are delicious. I was looking at the
Good.
scallops thinking, "Oh, that's what I'm having next. The scallop recipe. I haven't had those in a while. But for example, melatonin, um, that was actually one of the things I was wondering as I was reading the book.
Mhm.
So, people think of eggs as maybe a breakfast food or
Right.
maybe
Mhm.
brunch, later in the morning
Mhm.
for lunch. But why not have them for dinner? And
Right.
then two other foods you mentioned. Well, you could have a salad with cucumbers in them. Those you mentioned were good for melatonin, and
Exactly.
have a vegetable like broccoli or asparagus. And that
Exactly.
meal, without realizing it, is a really a meal that's quite rich in melatonin. So it's a perfect
Exactly.
example of food. Although you do, recommend supplements, you tie B vitamins and
Mhm.
minerals and things. There's perfect recommendations in there for that too. One of the things that I was surprised about, and this is something I've struggled with. Well, I mean, I appreciate to get your opinion on it, but I've wondered myself. You know, I personally feel if I eat a lot of protein at night, let's say I go out to
Mhm.
dinner and there's nothing on the menu except protein,
Mhm.
then I have trouble falling asleep because I have a ton. It gives me a lot of energy.
Mhm.
Where if I have a carb meal,
Mhm.
let's say I had risotto, let's say
Right. Right.
I'm gonna sleep better with a carb.
Mhm.
But you're saying
Mhm.
in the book that a moderate amount of protein is what some of the research has shown. Probably people have to experiment, wouldn't you say? But
Oh, exactly. And that's where, and I'm glad you raised that point because, over time we've come to understand, again, as I think you have studied and talked about for many years, Donna, that the microbiome is so highly unique for the most part. There's some overlap in what we each have, but it tends to be unique. And for that reason, what one person may experience with a food may be different. So I agree, and part of the spirit with which you wrote this book is these are some guidelines. You may not experience all of these, and you may in fact have a different effect in this food, in which case we need to explore more and help you figure out what that might be. As you described, it might be that having carbohydrates at night may help you sleep, but it may need to be tweaked a little bit if that's not the case, if you're struggling to sleep, if you're having insomnia. So I absolutely agree. I think it does vary for different people, but what we provided is some general guidelines of what the research shows.
you got me thinking though, because I was thinking, well, protein and carbs. How can I do that myself?
Right.
And we do have a probiotic protein shake that's actually
Mm,
it's pea protein and rice, so it's
mm,
protein, but
mhm,
it's also like a carb too. And
mhm,
so I it just reminded me that sometimes I'll
mhm.
have that for my very last meal of the day, and I definitely sleep better.
Right.
Definitely,
That's a good point. Yeah.
and moderation is a big point that you make early on. That it's really about you certainly don't want to go to bed with a lot of food in your stomach and not overeating ever. And so I
Right.
liked it that you pointed that out, moderation.
Right. I think
Right.
that happens with everything. We talk about alcohol in the book because, again, more people drink alcohol than do not. So I felt a certain responsibility about providing some guidelines around that, as well as other things, that some
Well,
people may or may not eat.
Well, so can you talk about that a little bit more? Like, what does alcohol do when you first drink it, and then later on at night when you're trying to sleep through the night?
Exactly. So, there's good data that the resveratrol from red wine is helpful for our brain, and does help us. And we touch on that in a few different parts of the book. But in general, I try to offer guidelines of, have your alcohol with your meal earlier in the evening. And if you're noticing that you're struggling to sleep and you're noticing that pattern, then either cut that out and maybe have it at your weekend brunch or your weekend lunch rather than in the evening if it's disrupting your sleep. But the second thing that alcohol also does, in addition to potentially disrupting your sleep, is that it is a depressant. So people who are having more alcohol than maybe they know that they may be having more alcohol. For example, early in COVID, in in March, in fact, the American Psychiatric Association did a survey, and already at that point, they noticed certain things. And one of them was that alcohol and drug use across the board was increased. And that was in March. I can only assume that with confinement and the stress that people are experiencing and job loss and difficulty, that could have worsened. So, the problem and concern I have is that alcohol is a depressant, and in the short term, maybe, and I'm talking more people having difficulty with alcohol. I'm not talking a person has with dinner, but when they're consistently having higher and higher amounts of it, it will drive depression and worsen anxiety. So those are some, in addition to that, separate to all the medical effects it's going to have on your body. So, we offer some guidelines around moderation, having it earlier in the day, noticing a pattern, if so, switching to when you have it. And, I think that with those guidelines, people will hopefully understand where it can fit into in their life.
What about coffee? Probably the most popular drink in the entire world.
Right. So the interesting thing is we offer some, and if not dosing, but we offer the number of milligrams in certain sizes of coffee, and the fact that there's still caffeine in decaf coffee, which many people don't realize. So with for example, when I have conversations with people around sleep hygiene, I will say to them, make sure that if you are drinking coffee, you're drinking it before 2 p.m. in the day. I wouldn't follow that up with decaf, because you are in some small way adding, you can have decaf depending on how much of coffee you had in the morning, but you are also consuming a little bit of caffeine with that. So rather switch to something like chamomile tea after that point, because that also is not only calming and soothing, it also helps sleep, for example. So, caffeine is something that certain people have a high tolerance, but others, really struggle with worsening anxiety and that type of thing when they have caffeine. So really, and then there are also the caffeinated drinks that are out there. So one has to be quite careful, because those also can have a ton of added sugar.
I think the reason people drink caffeine, especially in the morning, is for energy.
Yes. Hmm.
I have
Absolutely.
I have a gene called CYP1A2, which is very common. So many people have this gene, and a variant in the gene. And so I don't clear coffee. Even if I drink, like, it's interesting that you said even decaffeinated coffee has some caffeine. I really actually didn't know that. I just trusted that it was really decaffeinated. But I notice if I drink it in the morning, it does give me a lot of energy. But with this gene, you don't clear the caffeine, and so hours later, it's still running around wildly in your body, stimulating
Wow.
things. And if you have it, then let's say you go out to dinner and you have this lovely little piece of chocolate mousse or whatever.
Mhm.
These are the people that are still up, ready to clean their entire house at 3 o'clock in the morning because they have so
Mhm.
much energy. So
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned the diet drinks because they're so prevalent. And even in the health food store, you'll see a bunch of them. And they're
Yes. Yeah.
supposedly healthy, since they're in a health
That's
food
right.
store. But
You have to look at the ingredients, right? That's the whole thing.
and so I'm thrilled, of course, that, and this, we've known each other for a long time,
Yeah.
that I'm a big proponent of fermented foods. And
Yes.
I would love for you to speak about fermented foods and their
Absolutely.
connection with mental health.
Absolutely. And I remember that from, the products and your books and all of that. I just such impressive knowledge that you've always brought to the table around those foods.
Thank you.
In terms of mental health, what we've found is that by looking at the studies that basically fermented foods were very helpful to the gut bacteria. And, some of those simple rules around including prebiotics, probiotics, and fermented foods were helpful to almost resetting a person's gut. So, say they were having inflammation or struggling with a leaky gut or having other symptoms or other pain and discomfort, it was one way to start reworking that. And, I start off because I'm offering people food solutions, and usually we might talk about things like miso and kimchi and kombucha and that type of stuff, and kefir. But basically, because we are providing food sources and examples, I would love to have I would love in the future to be able to offer them some understandings of how they can ferment foods, and some of the work that you've done and that type of thing, so that they can almost do it on their own too.
It really is a lot of research on fermented foods well, for example, depression and anxiety are the two. Fermented foods are considered to be anxiolytic, meaning they keep you from being depressed. And I know the word kefir in Turkish. Turkey, this is where kefir came from, the milk kefir. It came from Turkey long thousands of years ago, and it means in Turkish, feel good. I know also with our children that when their parents start them off early in life eating the fermented foods and the vegetables, which not all fermented foods are the same. So I'm talking about yogurt and kefir if people can do dairy, fermented milk, and of course, definitely fermented vegetables. But we have parents to start their children off early in life. And one of the things that you can consistently count on with those kids is every one of them, they're so happy. They're easy to raise because they're just positive little beings. So their parents have a lot of joy out of that. So I definitely think fermented foods or fermented vegetables in particular, seriously not given the credit that they deserve as far as raising healthy, strong, resilient people. Is nutrition alone then? I don't think you're probably saying that if people have schizophrenia, if they have bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorder, would they just be able to, change their diet and everything will clear up and they'll be fine? Or
no, but, no, definitely not saying that. I still prescribe medications, and I feel that medications still at this point have a significant importance in severe mental illness. If someone is suicidal or manic or psychotic, they need medications possibly just to start stabilizing them. They might need to be hospitalized, but food does not need to be excluded from that equation, is my perspective. And that once they're stabilized and starting to feel somewhat better, food can continue to be a part of that treatment plan. I think it would be irresponsible for me to say that, eat blueberries and your PTSD would go away. That simply is not true, and we don't have the evidence behind that. But what we are saying is that if you embrace these foods as part of your diet and you are struggling with certain mental health symptoms, you may or may not be on a medication, but you can use these nutritional strategies to augment how you are feeling. And if you're on a medication, you definitely want to discuss that with your doctor, not the food strategy. I mean, you can mention the food strategy to your doctor, but you don't want to suddenly say, well, I'm going to eat this food and I'm going to stop my Prozac. That's definitely not what we're trying to say. So it really is putting it all together in a good, solid treatment plan. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, making sure they know. If you're seeing a primary care as well, which I hope you are, having them know what your plan is as well. So it's really about moderation, guidance, incorporating these nutritional strategies in whatever you are doing.
So when people are reading the book, they're really getting a great understanding and lots of examples of nutritional psychiatry, but you also bring up a term in the book, chrononutrition, which is how our body's internal clock affects digestion and metabolism. I thought that was really great that you brought that up, and the good bacteria, how they have their own circadian rhythm. And when we screw them. We screw up our own rhythm. We're affecting their rhythm. There's just
Yes.
great information. People are going to love the book, and I hope that people run out and buy it. It's very easy to read too. I mean, I read it quickly,
Oh,
and
good.
just constantly picked up more and more. I'm not a speed reader either, but I just easily found myself moving from chapter to chapter. Then I go back and reread certain sections that I'd want to know about sleep. For example, that's something I'm always
Right.
working on for myself.
Oh, exactly.
But just to kind of wrap up, there was one big question that followed me all the way through the book, and that was at the very beginning. In your dedication, you said your mother gave you the most important advice in your life, and I kept thinking, what is it? Would you share that with us? What was this
Of
great
course, I'd be
one?
happy to. It's not going to be related to food, although it's not going to be
That's
related to
okay.
food, not directly. So, interestingly, my mom is a double-boarded physician, and she met my husband before I did. And one of the things that I guess I was much younger and, dating and doing whatever young women do. And she, when I did meet my husband, she was just very clear about, I guess she understood something about me since my childhood and who I was. And she said, I think that that's going to be the young man that you marry. And if you are, interested in dating him, or you have started dating him, then that would be, she sort of guided me in that way. And I think it was one of the best pieces of advice. I really do. So in addition to the fact that she taught me so much, and I'm very, very close to her, I always honor that, she had that kind of maternal instinct to say, I think that person is going to be good for you. And I've never forgotten that. That's right.
Wow. Well, over these years since we have met, I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to write this book and that you're in this field of nutritional psychiatry, actually. And it's just, I guess it's similar, but
Right.
there's just not enough of this. And I think what's always necessary is bringing the information out into the public so people can use it and benefit
Exactly.
from it. And you've done that. So thank you very much for the book. And thank you for this podcast, for
Oh,
taking your time. I know you're really busy right now and you've got this book, you're launching the book and you've got lots of interviews. So I feel real lucky that you took the time to be with us.
that is always such a pleasure. And I thank you for finding the time as well to host me and to read the book and to share it, because it's the most important thing. Is your feedback is so important to me, because I want people to be able to read it and say, I can get some take home points from here. It's not a geeky book that's filled with words I don't understand, but something I can actually take some value from. So thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
Well, here's my main feedback for everybody else that's listening. I think you should buy the book after you finish reading the book and made lots of important notes for yourself and made changes to your diet. Pass it on to other people, because this is definitely a book that should be out in the world. And is it available on Amazon?
It is. It is available at all major online retailers, and they can also go to my book site, and the links are all there.
Thank you very much for writing it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.